everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you wish it weren't so loud?
No.
Okay. Thank you. So, good evening. We're getting off to a little bit of a late start. We have a nice full agenda for tonight. My name is Shay Schwalberg, and I'm standing in tonight for Barbara Cooper, chair of the Fidalgo Democrats, who has undergone some successful surgery today. And we almost thought she'd make it, but she's still under anesthesia. Okay.
Well, that would be funny.
Seriously. So just for everybody to know, this meeting is recorded and will be put on YouTube. You'll get a link to it if you've given us your email address. Be sure to not walk in front of the camera or you will be on camera. Okay, we've got Zane Butler at the back who's done this for us forever. Thank you so much, Zane. Who is training Colton, a local high school junior. Stand up, Colton. And Colton will be bringing in many 18-year-old seniors to vote this November. Next meeting is November 12th. As many of you know, we meet once a month. We have public educational meetings. It'll be with Kurt Dunbar, who is a history professor at Skagit Valley College. He'll be discussing the rise of fascism and authoritarianism. Could it be more timely? He is a very good speaker. On November 5th, the Skagit Democrats are holding a watch party at the Swinomish Casino for anyone who'd like to come. It's free and open to everyone who will be cheering, of course, for the right team.
Lefty.
Correct. You got it. Is there a person in this room who does not know that the state senator from the 40th, Liz Loveland, is running for re-election, as are Clyde Shavers and Dave Paul, our state representatives from the 40th, as well as a challenger, an excellent challenger, Janet St. Clair, running against the incumbent Republican senator in the 10th. If you live in the 40th, work for the 10th. Liz is going to get reelected. The 10th is one of the most targeted districts in the state. Everybody understands what that means. There is more money gone into the Republican candidate's campaign for the 10th in the Senate than any other race in the state. And, you know, there is a bell-shaped curve. I mean, there comes a point when more money's like, what difference does it make? But Janet did extremely well in the primary. She has a real shot at defeating this incumbent and switching the seat from red to blue. Volunteers don't have to live in the 10th. Donors don't have to live in the 10th. Anyway, I know you all have been.
Where is the 10th?
South Fidalgo. It's South Fidalgo, about the third of South Fidalgo. It's Whidbey Island, Camino Island, parts of Mount Vernon. It's a very gerrymandered district. But she's doorbelling, phone banking, as are all the other candidates. But this is a place where your help can really make a big difference. So I know that we have at least one important person to introduce tonight besides our speaker. Who's running for something tonight?
Where'd he go?
He's right there. Stand up. You are?
I am Richard Brock-Smith. I'm running for Skagit County Commissioner. So if you don't know me, you can find me on richardbrocksmith.com. I'm a scientist by training, and I've been on Mount Vernon City Council for the last 7 years there, working on housing, salmon recovery, and anti-poverty efforts. So I hope you take a look. Thank you.
And I'd like to thank Richard for running because it's not an easy thing to do. Are there any other electeds or anybody else who requires being acknowledged? Okay, in that case, what else do I have? Oh, I think I skipped to the second page before I went to the first. Yeah, okay. So normally when Barbara does this so well, we start our meetings with an acknowledgement. We, the Fidalgo Democrats, acknowledge that we gather on indigenous land, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Samish and Swinomish people, and pay our respect to elders past, present, and future. Before we continue with the meeting, we also want to acknowledge the fact that our friend of many years, Jeff Mount, has passed away.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Jeff passed away in August. He is a previous chair of the Skagit Democrats. He was an active Democrat. He was on our Fidalgo Democrats steering committee. He was a volunteer with the Anacortes Family Center, the Anacortes Library, Helping Hands Food Bank, and the Lincoln Theater, among other things. He was a very special person, and we all miss him very much. If you have not signed in to our mailing list by the door, please do. We'd love to have your name and email address to include on our list. Please make sure your cell phones are turned off. Another thanks goes to Rita Sullivan, provider of Cookies Forever. So there are cookies and some drinks at the back. Please help yourselves. We are an educational association. We are not a 501c3, but we have the same kind of tax status. We have some expenses, so at some point during the evening we will pass the hat and would certainly appreciate any donations if you're so inclined. No one here needs a reminder that this is perhaps the most important election of our lives coming up. It's important to vote all the way down the ballot. We do have voter registration forms in the back should anyone need one, or if you think you know someone who could use it. As an education association, we don't endorse candidates. We are not a PAC, but we do provide education. With some of the contributions we've received in the past, after our expenses have been met, we have donated to organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center and World Central Kitchen. We also regularly volunteer as an organization for the Brick Dinner at the Presbyterian Church throughout the year. So, on to the reason you all have come tonight, which is to hear about these 4 initiatives which have been placed on the ballot by one individual's funding, who I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit more about. I actually was stunned to see the Seattle Times editorials, which I'm sure you're going to, we have to shut our mouths. Because it was, I mean, they can be conservative, but that was surprising. So tonight's speaker, who I do have an introduction for, and of course I can't find it. All right, you're gonna have to introduce yourself. Is Calvin Jones is the Outreach Director for Defend Washington. He's been an advocate for progressive taxation and housing policy in Seattle for 8 years. Previously an aide to Senator John Lovick, who I served with in the State House. He's going to talk to us about the 4 initiatives. He will welcome questions from us as he goes through each initiative, rather than waiting until the end, and talk about the things that we can do to defeat those initiatives. He has brought with him some handout that we'll pass around in case anybody is not sufficiently familiar with them. And Defend Washington is a branch, I guess, of Fuse.
Yes.
And does everybody here know Fuse Washington? If you don't, Calvin will probably say something, but do look it up. It is probably the best progressive voter's guide out there, and it's really worth knowing about. And finally, I'm going to totally embarrass the person who's chatting right now. She's going to model for us the Brad Green of our presidential nominee and her Converse. So a statement on behalf of, and that's all we're saying right now about the presidential. Anyway, with that silliness, Calvin, thank you so much for coming all the way up here.
Thank you for that wonderful welcome, Shay, and thank you all for welcoming me into this space. I'm so excited to be here tonight. As Shay mentioned, my name is Calvin Jones. I am the Outreach Director for the Defend Washington campaign, which is the campaign against the 4 dangerous and deceptive initiatives that will be on all Washington ballots in just a couple weeks. I believe ballots drop in 11 or so days, so the election's really coming up. As Shay mentioned, we're housed under Fuse Washington, which is the state's largest progressive advocacy organization. Fuse does a lot of different work in very important races around the state, from the 3rd Congressional District with Marie Glusenkamp-Perez, to the Pierce County Commissioner race, all the way out to the Spokane County Commissioner. Basically, anywhere there are progressive candidates challenging more conservative Republicans, the Fuse usually tries to step in to provide a helping hand. But for tonight, we're talking about initiatives. The 4 initiatives that you will see on your ballot when you get it in a couple weeks are Initiative 2117, which would repeal the Climate Commitment Act, Initiative 2124, which would dismantle Washington's long-term care insurance program, Initiative 2109 would repeal the capital gains tax, and Initiative 2066 would repeal common sense protections for our utility providers in Washington state. We knew he was coming. Boom, yeah. The guy on your screen is Brian Haywood. Brian is a hedge fund manager who lives in Redmond. He moved here from California to benefit from our unfortunately regressive tax system, and he paid $6 million on paid signature gatherers in more conservative areas of the state to get these initiatives on the ballot in front of you. He initially gathered signatures for 6 initiatives. He sent all 6 to the legislature in their session earlier this year. The legislature actually passed 3 of them that were seen as less impactful, sent 3 to the ballot, and he teamed up with another organization called the Building Industry Association of Washington for 1 more initiative that gathered signatures this year. So there were 7 in all, 3 passed in the legislature, and there are going to be 4 remaining on the ballot. But if you remember one thing from tonight, it's that talking about the initiatives as individually and the policy details about them is hard. Talking about Haywood is easy. So if you just have 30 seconds to talk to a voter and you don't have time to go into detail about what the Climate Commitment Act is, you should just say that all of these initiatives are by and for Haywood, his wealthy friends, and corporations. They're good for them, they're bad for the rest of us. So the simplest message we deliver as a campaign is just that Haywood made these initiatives, they're good for him, they're bad for the rest of us, vote no on all of them. As we'll see in the rest of the 40 minutes of presentation, some of these initiatives can be a little bit complicated, we can get into the policy weeds, and oftentimes we don't have that much time to talk to voters if we're just writing postcards or knocking voters at the door. So the simplest campaign message we can possibly deliver is we should vote no. Am I speaking too loudly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the feedback. The simplest message we can deliver to voters is that they should vote no because these initiatives are by and for a hedge fund manager who lives in Redmond. Here are the initiative texts that you'll see on the ballot. You won't need to sort of read them all now. I do want to point out one thing about these initiatives, specifically for initiatives 2109, 2117, and 2124. In 2022, the state legislature started requiring something called a public investment impact disclosure on initiatives that basically require initiatives on the ballot to state their impact on the state's finances. So Initiative 2109's public investment impact disclosure is this measure would decrease funding for K-12 education, higher education, school construction, early learning, and childcare.
Oh, that's great.
And it really, yes. I think that Washington State has had a history of, let's call it libertarian initiative voting. If you remember the $30 car tab initiative, and then we've denied some carbon tax initiatives in the past. But fear not, because these public investment impact disclosures being directly on the ballot are very helpful for us because they help us communicate to voters that we can't just cut our own taxes forever and pretend like everything's going to be all right. So I just wanted to provide that little bit of context about the actual initiative language that will be on the ballot when you open it. It does help us defeat these more so than initiatives in the past. And with that, let's talk about our first initiative. Initiative 2117 would repeal something called the Climate Commitment Act. This is Washington's cap and invest program that puts a cap on the amount of pollution that the state's largest 100 corporate polluters are allowed to emit, and it enforces that cap by auctioning off carbon allowances to these corporations. So if I am Chevron, I can't just emit pollution in Washington willy-nilly. I have to go to the Washington state government, buy carbon allowances for the amount of pollution I'm going to emit in the state, and only then can I pollute in compliance with state law. Yeah. The cap does go down over time. The cap hits 0 at 2050. So the Climate Commitment Act is our core way as a state to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And we do that by making oil companies pay the price for the pollution that they create. The money we raise from those carbon auctions goes towards two core things: green energy and transportation. We take that money and we invest it in things like salmon habitat restoration, which, as I'm sure you've read, restoring culverts is pretty expensive. An important issue that is funded by the Climate Commitment Act for voters around here, I'm sure, is new ferries. As I'm sure you all know, our ferry fleet is old, and the ferry fleet is the largest single source of state-owned pollution in the state. And so the Climate Commitment Act funded, I believe the number is $500 million towards getting those new hybrid electric ferries, which will be both more reliable and and much less emissions as well, once we get also the docks on each side electrified as well, so the ferry can charge when it's at port. But as you can imagine, if 2117 passes and corporations are then allowed to pollute for free, we will see two core impacts. We're going to see more pollution, because if I'm Shell and now I can now pollute for free, I'm going to pollute more. And we're going to see devastating funding cuts for clean energy and transportation, all the way from salmon habitat restoration, ferries, as we've talked about, air filtration systems in schools that are affected by air pollution, paying for wildland firefighters, helping tribal nations invest in green energy, especially a big solar project in the Yakima Reservation. Devastating funding cuts to the tune of $1.8 billion a year. So, that's kind of the wonky details, but I want to arm you all with the simplified messaging that we found is the most effective with undecided voters. So if you are talking to someone at the doors or just a neighbor, and you want to convince them to vote no, these are the messages that we found are most effective for getting people onto the no side. And I'm going to give two messages for why someone should vote no, and then I'm going to arm you for addressing the most common talking point you'll hear from the yes side. So the two talking points to get people to vote no are just as I said: more pollution, less funding for things we like. On the more pollution side, the message, and I'll read it aloud here: 2117 is a threat to our air, land, and water, and puts our health at risk and results in more adults and kids suffering from asthma and illness. It jeopardizes protections for waterways, farmland, and causes more pollution in the air we breathe, and guts programs that care about our communities. You might think that this messaging is a little bit watery from a climate change perspective. It's really leaning into pollution as it affects us in the right here and now. And the reason for that is voters who care about climate change are already probably voting no on the initiative. So if you're optimizing your message for voters who aren't necessarily sure how they're going to vote, emphasizing the impacts that pollution has on our day-to-day lives right now and the air we breathe and the water we drink, we found is more effective than talking about climate change because those voters, again, are already voting no. The second impact that we've mentioned are those devastating funding cuts. The Climate Commitment Act raised $1.8 billion last year. $1 billion of that, so more than half, goes to the transportation budget. And the transportation budget is another thing that undecided voters care a lot about. So Initiative 2117 threatens the safe, reliable functioning of our entire transportation system. It would cut 1/3 of the budget for our state's already stressed transportation plan, making traffic congestion worse and commutes longer. I give you full license to riff on this messaging, and if you want to talk about ferries or salmon because that's what you're passionate about, that's what your listener is passionate about, feel free to do so. But if you are looking for a default message for why someone should vote no on 2117 from a funding cuts perspective, leading into that $1 billion in funding cuts of transportation is what we found to be most effective. The last thing I want to arm you with here is how to address the single most common thing you will hear from the yes side. It's really their only campaign talking point. They're just running around the state saying that 2117 will lower the price of gas at the pump for consumers. And if you hear that, the best way to respond is nothing in Initiative 2117 guarantees lower gas prices. The only guarantee is that we give a tax cut to oil companies, and we're going to see more pollution, and we're going to see funding cuts. If you want to think that those oil companies are going to do the right thing by the rest of us, be my guest. But they could build a new pipeline with that money. They could return that money to shareholders. They could do whatever they want with their money. 2117 is fundamentally a tax break for polluting corporations, and the rest of it is who knows what. So if you hear something about the gas prices in Washington State, you should just say, nothing in Initiative 2117 guarantees lower gas prices. They could have repealed the gas tax, but that's not what they did. They went for the Climate Commitment Act instead. Any questions on 2117?
That Climate Commitment Act, when was that passed?
I'm going to be repeating the questions in the mic for our virtual viewers. The question is, when was the Climate Commitment Act passed? And I believe it was in 2021. So it's a relatively young program. The investments are sort of just starting to get out the door. So we've put that $500 million into ferry funding, but we don't have the new ferries yet because it takes a while to do. So it's young enough that we have less to point to than we might have if we had an older program that had already sort of built the things that we were promised.
So does it threaten the infrastructure of electrification of the ports?
I am.
Repeat my question.
Thank you for the cash. The question is, does it threaten the funding for electrification of ports? And I am 95% sure the answer to that is yes. In that $500 million in ferry electrification funding, I think that includes the port electrification, as that's kind of considered part of one bundle of capital investments. I don't know that for an absolute fact though, so hence my 95% confidence interval.
What kind of businesses or examples of businesses that we might know are supporting the no on 2117? Who are the good guys in business?
So the question is, who are the good guys in business? And the first good guy I want to list for you is British Petroleum, a classic good guy. They've endorsed the no on 2117 campaign. Just kidding about the good guy part, but they have endorsed no. The list of endorsements for 2117 is extremely long. There are over 500 organizations that have done so. The big ones that I know off the top of my head are Microsoft and Amazon have both endorsed no on 2117. I'm not sure about Boeing. And I can get the list of endorsing organizations, but 2117 draws the most passion out of all the initiatives and has built the broadest coalition of over 500 organizations. I believe over half of tribal nations have endorsed no on 2117 as well. So it's an initiative that has driven sort of the most money and passion from an endorsement perspective on both sides. Other questions on 2117? We're 1/4 of the way through. Initiative 2124 would dismantle Washington's long-term care insurance program called Washington Cares. What is Washington Cares? What is long-term care insurance? So, I believe in 2019 was when Washington Cares was passed, but we were seeing across the United States a crisis in long-term care because federal programs like Medicare and Medicaid don't cover long-term care expenses very well. In order to qualify for getting long-term care through Medicaid, you have to have less than $2,000 to your name in any form. So we're seeing seniors impoverish themselves across the United States to get under that wealth threshold in order to qualify for something like as simple as just a wheelchair, maybe if you're not as mobile as you are. If you have $5,000 to your name and maybe you can't get up the stairs in your home as much, you don't qualify for those federal programs for long-term care, and now all of a sudden you need to leave your house because you can't afford a ramp up the stairs and the federal government's not going to be there to help you. So Washington State became a national leader in trying to plug this gap in our healthcare system by creating Washington Cares. What it is it's a 0.58% payroll tax. So every $100 you make, you pay 58 cents of this tax. and you accrue a benefit of $36,000, a lifetime benefit of $36,000 to help pay for qualifying long-term care expenses. So in Washington, benefits don't start until 2026, but let's say in 2028, well, maybe a little longer, 2030. If you have been paying into this program and all of a sudden you need a ramp in your home, you can go to Washington State and say, hey, I have the Washington Cares benefit. Can you help me pay for this ramp in my home so I can stay in my home where I want to be, where my community is, rather than have to go somewhere else and usually get much more expensive health care. If you staying in a nursing home is on the order of $100,000 per year, that's expensive for that person, it's expensive for the taxpayer, and it's usually not what people want to do. So by keeping people in their homes for living with more independence and more dignity for longer, we're helping people do what they want to do, and we're saving tons and tons of money because caring for someone in their home is a lot cheaper than caring for someone in a nursing home. So that's all great. That's Washington Cares, yay. The bad news is Initiative 2124 would financially bankrupt the program. What the initiative, the text of the initiative is seemingly benign. All it says is that people can opt out of the long-term care insurance program. But the actual impact of enabling an opt-out from Washington Cares would be that it would bankrupt the program. We know from programs like Social Security, like Obamacare, like Medicare, these programs are not opt-in, opt-out because they all require broad public participation to provide a broad benefit. You know, we are a society, we are in this together, and with Washington Cares, it's the same thing. It needs to have a broad net in order to provide that effective benefit. As soon as you let people opt out, some people are gonna opt out, then the benefit's gonna go down because there's less money in the program, more people opt out, benefit goes down, and it puts the program in a financial tailspin. When talking about 2124, the most important message we found is that Initiative 2124 hurts women the most. We live in a patriarchal society where women are expected to provide unpaid care for their friends and loved ones when they are in need. And if we pass Initiative 2124 and 3.9 million Washingtonians lose their long-term care benefits, it is the women of Washington that are going to pick up the bill. Not only will they pick up the bill, but under Washington Cares, family caregiving can be compensated. So if you're caring for your brother and they have Washington Cares, you can be paid for your time. But if 2124 passes and Washington Cares is dismantled, we are asking the women of Washington to, go back to the way things used to be and provide all that care unpaid for free. Women are 73% more likely to quit their jobs in order to provide care. They're 5 times more likely to go down to part-time work to provide care. And so we know that if 2124 passes, women are going to be hurt the most. The other talking point to hit if you're talking to someone about 2124 is to say that it throws us to the whims of the private long-term care insurance industry. With Washington Cares, we have a broad public benefit that is fundamentally on your side. That is the beauty of public health insurance. It wants to give you the benefit, it wants to give you that care. Private long-term care insurance, these are profit-making entities. They can delay and deny claims. They can discriminate against women because women live longer. They can deny those with pre-existing conditions, and they're also just very expensive. So with Washington Cares, we have a broad public benefit that's on our side. Without it, we're thrown to the whims of the private long-term care insurance industry. Yes, question?
Hi, once more, would you repeat what the benefits of Washington Care are in terms of the amount that people could collect if they're eligible and what they pay caregivers?
Yeah, so the benefit is a $36,500, sorry, repeating the question. The question is, could you repeat what the Washington Cares benefit is? The benefit is a $36,500 lifetime benefit that goes towards quote-unquote qualifying long-term care expenses. The classic examples that we hear about are wheelchairs, ramps in your homes, accessible showers, in-home care, but the list of things that are eligible will be sort of subject to change and updates from the state legislature. So if we're seeing a demand for something that's not covered, that can always change because the program is always evolving. I think the biggest criticism you might hear of that number is that it just doesn't cover that much time in a nursing home. Like if a nursing home costs $100,000 a year, that's a relatively small benefit. But again, the point of the program is to try and keep people in their homes where they want to be, where it's a lot cheaper to provide care for them. So it's that win-win that we're going for. Yes?
So when did Washington Care start? And also, hardly anybody's retired in here, but just in case. When did it start, and what does that, I mean, how does that work for us who are already retired?
Yeah. The question is, when did Washington Care start, and how does it work if you're already retired? The legislation itself was enacted in 2019, though the payroll tax and therefore the benefit sort of didn't start until 2023 due to some sort of wrangling at the state legislature. So as of last year, the sort of payroll tax was on in full and benefits start in 2026. If you are already retired or retired before 2023, and you are no longer making income, essentially you are never paying into the program and you are never going to get a benefit. Well, not never, but it's, you know, you can kind of think of it as a nothing burger for your personal finances if you have not paid into the program. But a great question. Question in the back?
How long do you have to pay in for to get the program, and what are the qualifications or eligibility?
Yeah, great question. The question is, how long do you have to pay into the program to get benefits? The short answer is 10 years. To get the full benefit, you have to pay into the program for 10 years, and you have to be working at least part-time. I believe the number is 10 hours per week of work of paying the payroll tax, which is quite low. You know, a full-time job is 40 hours a week, so you kind of have to be working a quarter of a full-time job in order for that to count as a year of paying into the program. We're gonna get a little bit into the weeds here. If you were born before 1968, which it looks like you might be, you are eligible for basically partial accrual of the benefit. So if you pay into it 1 year, you are eligible for a 10% benefit. If you pay into it 2 years, you get a 20% benefit. But that's only for people born before 1968. Though again, the state legislature can change the rules in the future and kind of make this partial accrual available to everyone. One thing about the benefit, and one big criticism of the program, is that the benefit was not portable. So if you moved out of Washington State, you had paid into the program, you wouldn't be able to benefit from it. As of this year, that is no longer true. The state legislature has made the benefit portable, so if you get the Washington Cares benefit and then you move to Idaho for some godforsaken reason, you can still get the benefit. Which I think is an important theme across these initiatives, is that the state legislature, we live in a democracy with a state legislature. They're always updating these programs. They represent you. You can give them feedback. We can make changes to these programs, but these initiatives are just this giant wrecking ball that just like bulldoze everything in their path. So any kind of criticism that you feel like is a little bit nitpicky, you can say something like, that's a great point. I would love to see that improvement in the program too. Like, let's talk to Senator Loveland and see if we can get that change put in the program. Yes?
And how about payment to caregivers?
The question is, how about payment to caregivers? Caregivers are eligible for the Washington Cares benefit. So if you have the benefit and you need to pay your caregiver, that money can come from Washington Cares.
Oh, I see. So it isn't a separate payment to caregivers. It comes out of the $36,500.
Exactly, yes.
So are you saying, is there anybody benefiting from it yet, or do we have to put 10 years of work in before there's a benefit? Is that what you're saying?
So the benefits start in 2026. Most people have to do that 10 years. If you get into a severe accident, so if you're in a motorcycle crash, I'm sure we have a lot of motorcycle riders in the audience. If you're basically have a disabling event, you can basically get the full benefit sooner. Three, thank you. Shade to the rescue. If you've been paying it for 3 years and then have a disabling event, you can get the full benefit. So most people, kind of the standard use case of that 10-year pay-in won't start until 2033, but those partial benefit usage and those disabling events can happen sooner.
Thank you.
Great question. Yes?
I might have missed this. I was curious, is it $36,000 a cap? Like after that, you're on your own?
It is a cap. It does go up. Sorry. question is $36,000 a cap to the benefit? And the answer is yes. For right now, as of the current amount, once you hit $36,000, the rest is on your own or through other federal programs. It does go up with inflation, so by 2040, the benefit will be $60,000. But it's a quite modest payroll tax for a, above modest benefit. But if we wanted to see a larger benefit, we would just need to collect more money.
Can I add that Vice President Harris has just proposed that Medicare be expanded to essentially do even more of what this legislation will do. So it's a pretty good idea. I also wanted to add, if it's right,
Please.
This is a great example of what's wrong with initiatives, as Calvin's been saying. So when the legislature first passed this legislation, it had some real issues. It was not perfect, and there was a great deal of pushback, which caused the legislature the next year to amend it and repair some of its shortcomings, which is what we have today. But the folks who are backing this initiative, that wasn't good enough. They wanted to wipe it out completely. With an initiative, the fiscal impacts are really not clear. The language is not clear. There's no review by people who know what they're talking about. Remember Tim Eyman, and that's what you get with initiatives by and large in this state.
I think Danny Westneat said that Brian Haywood is Tim Eyman with a giant bank account. So the comparison is unfortunately apt.
Doesn't have to steal furniture from.
I would love if Brian Haywood was caught stealing furniture. That would make my freaking.
He's probably stealing something.
Yeah. Probably not paying taxes and stealing from the government, but go figure. The third initiative I want to talk about is, in some ways, the simplest, but for me, it is the most egregious as well. Initiative 2109 repeals Washington State's capital gains excise tax. The way the tax works is that if you make $250,000 in a single year in capital gains alone, then above that you pay a 7% tax, and that money goes towards childcare, early learning, and public education. $250,000 of capital gains in a single year is a whole lot. You basically need to be a hedge fund CEO, like an Amazon vice president. Like, you need to be very, very rich in order to even cross that threshold. Again, this is just capital gains. You can make $1 million in income and not pay a dime of this tax. The tax also excludes home sales, it excludes small business sales, it excludes retirement accounts. All the ways that middle class people might have a sort of windfall year and exceed that $250,000 threshold, those are all excluded. We were talking about profits from the sale of stocks and bonds, basically. And again, any dollar you make in profit above $250,000 in 1 year is taxed at a 7% rate. 0.2% of Washington taxpayers paid 1 penny of the capital gains tax last year. This is fewer than 4,000 people in the entire state paid this tax, but last year it raised $890 million for childcare, early learning, and public education. The capital gains tax is not a tax on millionaires. It is a tax on mega millionaires and billionaires. And 99.8% of people don't pay the tax because that threshold is so high. And again, that money goes towards early learning, childcare, and public education. The good news about 2109, or question?
What was the number of taxpayers thus far?
Fewer than 4,000 people last year paid the tax. So that's less than 0.2% of Washington taxpayers. Did I repeat the question? That question was what percentage, or how many people paid the tax? The good news about 2109 is that all you have to do is say what the initiative does, and people want to vote no. Like, it is instantly obvious that this is a bad idea and you should vote no. So as a sample message, you can say, 2109 is a tax break for a handful of super wealthy people, fewer than 4,000, mostly in King County, if you want to engage in King County bashing, sure. The initiative gives them a tax break while cutting $2.2 billion in early learning and education funding over the next 5 years. You say that, pretty much everyone's voting no. The only talking point you'll hear from the yes side is this idea that the capital gains tax is coming for you too. They call it the capital gains income tax, which does not make sense. Those are two legally different things. And they basically say oh, right now it's just the wealthiest 0.2%, but you never know who they're gonna come for next. If you do hear that talking point, the best thing you can say is just 99.8% of people don't pay it because it is designed to exclude the ways that middle class people make capital gains. Excludes home sales, excludes small business sales, excludes retirement accounts. This is a tax on mega millionaires and billionaires, and it is meant to be that way. Yes, question?
Only 4,000 people benefit. How does it even get on the ballot?
Money.
Because well,
yeah.
yes.
You should break out $6 million and gather signatures. You can do a lot of things with the initiatives that are not. The question is, if it benefits so few people, how to get on the ballot, and you just have to gather signatures. Other questions on 2109? Yes?
Does it exclude agriculture and farm sales? If it's stocks and bonds, it must, but that's important in Skagit County.
Yeah, the question is, does it exclude agriculture and farm sales? I believe the language in the law is primary residence. So if you're selling your vacation home, I believe that is still subject to the capital gains tax if you make more than $250,000 selling your vacation home. I am not exactly sure about agricultural exclusions, but it's a good question, and if it's not excluded, it's one of those things that's a definite, we should fix that. And again, we don't have to repeal the tax.
Thank you.
So, sale of certain livestock relating to farming or ranching is exempted. And then very nebulously worded, assets used in a trade or business to the extent those assets are depreciable under title blah, 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 which probably applies to farmland, timberlands, and so forth, are also exempted. So, yeah, there's some room. And
Also, if it's a business and you own the business, it might also fall under that small business exemption. So I'm gonna guess 90% chance yes. Other questions on 2109? Just one more. We can do this. The bad news is 2066 is the most complicated of them, so I've saved it for last when everyone's the sleepiest. 2066 did take a different path to the ballot than the other three initiatives, so I will talk about the history here for a second. So, as I mentioned, Haywood was initially collecting signatures for 6 initiatives. This was last year in 2023. He got enough signatures, he sent the 6 initiatives to the legislature. This session, they passed 3 because they were considered less a big deal. They sent 3 to the ballot. But a group called the Building Industry Association of Washington, BIAW, saw what Haywood was doing, and they said to themselves, I want to get in on that action. I love putting natural gas in new buildings that I make, and I want to do everything in my power to ensure that I can keep putting natural gas in the buildings I build. So BIAW went up to Haywood and said, hey, if I pay for the signature gatherers, will you take up my initiative as part of your broader campaign? Haywood said, sure. BIAW got the signatures. They were ratified in July, and Initiative 2066 is the sort of late-breaking initiative, but it's on the ballot. For the average voter, you should talk about them as 4 initiatives by and for Haywood. You don't necessarily need to go into that next level of detail, but Haywood certainly thinks of it as just as much of a baby as the other ones, so that sort of messaging associating the initiatives with Haywood and talking about how they're good for them, still very much applies with this initiative. What does 2066 do? The short answer is it forces us to invest in more methane gas infrastructure rather than cheaper, cleaner electrification infrastructure, which means that it will cost ratepayers more over time because electrification and the price of renewables is plummeting, and it will create more pollution in Washington State because it will deepen our reliance on methane gas rather than electricity. I'm going to use the phrase methane gas instead of natural gas. Whatever marketer invented the term natural gas, unfortunately, did a really good job because there's nothing natural about it. It's methane. It's a fossil fuel. It's no good. We have to frack it. Tons of emissions in various parts of the supply chain. So 2066 has, I think of it as a sort of three-pronged initiative from a policy perspective. The first thing it does is it takes away the ability of the State Building Code Council to require energy efficiency. Essentially, BIAW got mad at the State Building Code Council for saying, hey, our new buildings in Washington State need to meet energy efficiency standards. They think those standards are too high. The standards make it harder. It's still possible to put gas in new buildings if you can have that energy efficiency, but methane gas is less efficient and more polluting, so it's harder to reach that threshold. BIAW thinks energy efficiency standards for new buildings are too high, and they want to take those away. So that's one thing 2066 does. The second thing 2066 does is it repeals something called House Bill 1589 that was passed this year. It allows Puget Sound Energy, the state's largest utility, to invest more in electrification infrastructure and less in gas infrastructure over time. Essentially what happened is Puget Sound Energy went up to the state legislature and said, hey, I'm seeing dwindling demand for gas, but more demand for electricity. I have a bunch of old gas infrastructure that's going to become very expensive soon. I'd like to retire that early and essentially think of my financial portfolio as one thing. I said it was complicated, I'm sorry. State legislature said yes, passed something called House Bill 1589, and that gets taken away. Essentially what this means is Puget Sound Energy is forced to maintain gas infrastructure for longer than it wants to, which again will be expensive, and those prices will be passed on to ratepayers. The third thing, and this is the most angering part of this initiative for me, is that the initiative uses extremely broad language that says no city, county, or state shall do anything to discourage the use of methane gas. That is so sloppy. That is so broad. Like if you want to build a school and you need to shut off gas for a day, does that count as discouraging gas use? Like we were saying with legislators and processes and reviewing legislation, this kind of language would never make it into a bill that was passed by the state legislature, but BIAW just wants to cram that language in so it can have whatever it wants when it comes to methane gas. We would never pass maybe I would like us to pass a bill that said no city, county, or state shall do anything to discourage affordable housing or something like that. But instead we have nothing, no one can do anything to discourage methane gas is what 2066 gives us. So those are the three things. That's a lot. I know it's very complicated. Yes, question?
So I've heard an argument against 2066 in terms of saying, well, it really allows us to have a choice if we want gas or electricity.
Yeah.
What do you say to that argument?
That's a great question. The question is, I've been hearing people say 2066 just gives me a choice. How do we respond? The way to respond is that choice is already enshrined in state law. State law says if your utility is providing you an energy service, electricity, gas, you name it, you are legally entitled to that service. So you have that choice now, you have that choice protected into the future. What 2066 is about, it's all about looking forward. What investments are we going to make as a society? Are we going to invest in fossil fuel infrastructure, or are we going to invest in cheaper, cleaner electrification infrastructure? So, great question. The short answer is just say your access is already protected under state law. In terms of talking about this with your neighbors, that question gets at basically the opposition's only talking point. Essentially what they're saying is that Shay is going to barge into your home and go up to your gas stove and rip it out of the wall. That's their talking point. And again, in order to respond to that, we just have to say that's not true. Anyone who's using gas today, their access to gas is protected. What 2066 is all about what we invest in the future. In terms of talking points to get people to vote no, the 2 points you want to emphasize are affordability. A no vote on 2066 will help keep energy more affordable over time, and then environmental or clean energy. A no vote will, this initiative undoes efforts to keep our state on a path to cleaner, healthier energy. We need to vote no in order to transition to cleaner energy that keeps costs lower for longer. Questions on 2066? got everything. Yeah.
Do they have any initiatives for those people that have an old gas system to transfer something?
Yeah. The question is, if I have an old gas system, are there any programs to help me transition? The answer is yes. There are programs run by the state that help middle and low income families make electrification investments in their home. I was talking to someone yesterday and they said a heat pump cost them $14,000, which in the long scheme of things, that's quite cheap because your bill is going to go way down. But in the short scheme of things, not everyone has $14,000. So the state does have programs to help subsidize those investments for lower and middle income.
Renewable energy source. He also passed a fusion bill, which is another type of clean energy, and Senator Lovelit has as well. So it's really important for us as a district and as an area, because we're doing so much on a state level already for preventing climate change, just to vote no. And again, climate change is going to hurt all of us, but especially my generation.
Beautifully said. And with that, I'll send out these slides afterwards. I'll also send out some ways to get involved. Specifically, the No on 2117 campaign has the biggest field program. So if you're interested in helping out to defeat the initiatives, you can volunteer with No on 2117 or any other thing your local Democratic Party organization is doing. There's a lot of organizations fighting these initiatives because they're pretty bad and scary. And I thank you all for your time and support.
If you would mind going.
Calvin, thank you. I think you took 4 things that could have gotten us all very confused or put us to sleep, and you did neither. Everybody's still awake, right? Okay. So I want to thank everyone for coming. Again, we meet monthly, and our purpose is to provide education to the community. So please do sign up at the back if you haven't done so already to be on our mailing list. Calvin didn't say it, but he put his email address up on the screen, and I'll be happy to give it to anybody who wants it. If you have other questions that didn't occur to you tonight or you didn't want to speak up, I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you. With that, thank you all for coming out. It was a rainy night. Go out and... Oh, I'm so sorry.
So October 18th, we will be having the sign waving rally up and down all commercial. It's organized, so you get assigned to a block, but just show up and find a place to be.
So are the signs, do you provide the signs too? Or do you provide our own?
No,
Okay.
but that's a good question. There are several Harris signs here for people, particularly because people are having them disappear. Yeah.
I need 7 for my block. Harris signs, should I call the office
Grab
in Mount
them,
Vernon?
give me some money.
Didn't bring money tonight,
That's
but
okay.
yes.
That's okay.
I need to buy some signs. Do I
We know
go
how to
Yeah,
find
so they
you.
usually, it's usually a $20 donation.
I actually have one at home, so here's one. Which
Yeah.
you can have.
I have 2 at home, but I need 5 for my sign waivers.
Go ahead and
on
grab, yeah,
that-
go ahead
on
and
the
grab
18th.
those.
Okay, well, you can have this one too.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So that was the other
I have one
announcement.
at home.
All right.
Make those Harris signs.
Any other announcements for the good of the order, Richard?
Yeah, the Richard Brocksmith signs are free.
All right, not that this audience really needs it, but remember to talk to your friends, your family, your neighbors, your children. Everybody needs to vote this time. This is not a time to stay silent. I think we have one more question.
I
Comment.
just want to say we'll be sending out the endorsement list, Skagit County Democrats endorsement list via email.
With that, thank you again for coming out tonight. Thank you, Calvin, and see you next month.